Thank you for joining us on She's with the Band.
On this week's episode, Sue shares how a chance demo led to discovering a future music legend, her short-lived singing career, and how she found her passion, sealing deals as a top talent agent.
She's with the band. She's with the band.
This podcast is brought to you by Dover Street Productions and may contain some content that some listeners might find offensive. Let's begin.
I got a telephone call from Bess Coleman. Bess Coleman was a publicist that worked for NEMS. That was Brian Epstein's company. Because Tony Barrow, although he was the Beatles' PR man, they had such a roster of artists there that they had more than one PR person to handle it all. So Bess was lovely. I think Brian found her at EMI when the Beatles first came to London, and they went to EMI for their initial meetings. And I think she was in the press office there working for Sid Gillingham, who was head of publicity. So she was at NEMS as one of the PRs there. And I got a call from her saying, look, she said, there's this job going that I think that you might be interested in. And she told me that it was at EMI and they had an artist agency called West One Entertainments, which I wasn't aware of. And it paid really good money. And would I be interested in? And I went, oh, I don't know. I've never done PR. And I thought, well, maybe I should go and see what it's all about, because I did have my moments with Sean O'Mahony, and I thought maybe it's not going to end well here, you know. So off I went to EMI in Manchester Square, and West One Entertainments was on the ground floor. And I met the head of EMI, not EMI, West One Entertainments. His name was Arthur Muxlow. To this day, I don't know why I haven't Googled him. I'm not sure what he was, whether he was just he was an agent, a record company executive. Was he perhaps a DJ, one of those old-fashioned DJs? I have no idea. And he offered me this job as head of publicity with my own secretary. I mean, I'm all of 20 years old, and this massive corner office which overlooked the Mews at the back, where, funnily enough, Gordon Waller lived. So I used to spy on Gordon to see who was going in and out, you know. Who's the latest model du jour? Anyway, I accepted the job with great trepidation. I was really nervous about this. They had some pretty awful artists on their books, really old-fashioned artists like Russ Conway, who was a pianist, and Jimmy Young, who was a crooner DJ. I mean, he became a massive Radio 2 DJ. He was a big deal, but they didn't have any cool people. And I did accept it, but I was very worried that I couldn't pull this off. Really, I've never been so unsure of anything up until this point. And I felt a bit sick when I went there on the first day. But the guys that I worked with, they were a fabulous crew. They were all very formal. They weren't cool young guys. I don't know how old they were. They were all a lot older than me. They could have been maybe only 10 years older than me, and they just looked very old-fashioned, suits and ties and everything. So there was Peter Prince, wonderful sense of humour. There was Colin Byrne. There was Russell Turner, who was a very well-known DJ, and he was married to Barbara Lyon, whose parents were Ben and Bibi Lyon. They were the pre-Life with the Osbournes and the Kardashians. They filmed them, but it was all they were all dressed very beautiful, like they were going to a cocktail party. So that was him, and I think that was the crew. I think it was the three guys, me and Arthur Muxlow. Anyway, what they used to do there was a little theatre next door us, and this is where they used to do Radio Luxembourg Live once a week in this theatre, and all the bands used to come. You name them, they came to do this live. It was a big deal, Radio Luxembourg at the time. It was before pirate radio. And they'd have everybody. I mean, I can't remember if the Stones or the Beatles were ever on it, but you got the Hollies and the Searchers and Lulu and the Swinging Blue Jeans and the Animals. Everybody did it. And the hosts were Muriel Young and Sean Taylor. Anyway, West One Entertainments, that I was now a part of, did auditions on a Wednesday every 2 weeks. And the list of artists that were coming for these auditions were just typed up on a white piece of paper. And I don't think that there might have been a curtain, but it was like Broadway Danny Rose. You have never seen such a motley crew turning up every week. And it was so appalling that it was hysterical. And Peter Prince and I would hold this white sheet of paper up in front of us so no one could see us from the stage. And we'd just be laughing so hard that we'd shake. It was hysterical. Anyway, the only interesting act to come on with this lovely family, triplets from Scotland, 3 girls, the Carlins they were called, and their brother. And they were kind of folky. They strummed acoustic guitars and they had the most sublime voices, these girls. And I was quite interested in them, I thought. And they were pretty, the girls, as well. I took it further. I flew up to Scotland and met their parents and everything like that. And it was all going ahead. And one day I got so frustrated, I said to Peter, I don't think I can take these auditions anymore. I said, these acts are absolutely dreadful. I said, all I want, and I don't care if they can't sing. I want somebody that's got the most beautiful face. And I had a male in mind. I just want somebody that's so stunningly gorgeous. And we can work around that, that's got a bit of charisma. And he's saying to me, well, I wish you luck out of this lot. Well, one day I'd been out for lunch and I came back in and my secretary, God knows what she had to do. I hardly had any work to give her. I felt guilty. So she said to me, oh, somebody came in and left a package on your desk. So I said, who? So she said, oh, I don't know. So I went into my office and there on the desk is this demo and a photograph. Well, I looked at this photograph of this boy, young man. He was so gorgeous. I can't tell you, he had like curly dark hair. He like had a face of a cherub. I was so excited. I ran into, I read the letter. The letter was with it. And it was written by this boy's brother called David. I hope you don't mind me dropping that, but this is my brother. And we'd so much appreciate it if you listened to the demo and let us know you'd be happy to come in and whatever. So I said to Peter, look at this gorgeous boy. Look, I said, this is it. I want him. So Peter said, well, have you played? So I said, no, I haven't played it. I don't care. He said, well, let's play it. So we played this. Well, was this a talent? I can't tell you what the demo was at this minute, but it could have been one of his very famous songs. But this guy was sensational. Who was this guy? None other than Cat Stevens. They had a Greek surname. So I said, this guy is sensational. And Peter agreed. So we sent it up. Before I'd even got in touch with him, we sent it up to Ron White, who was the head of A&R at EMI. And we were just waiting and in anticipation just for him to say, bring him in. Sign him up. Right. And he turned him down. He turned him down because he said that he was too similar to Donovan. Well, Peter and I were absolutely gutted. Anyway, he came in and we were chatting away. And I don't think we told him at this point that he'd been turned down. Or maybe we were still waiting for an answer from Ron White. Anyway, in the meantime, I call Vicky Wickham, who's still at Ready, Steady, Go. She's the editor. And she occasionally put people on Ready, Steady, Go that didn't necessarily have a record release. Most people that went on, it was because they were releasing their new single and they were the record company wanted them to be on. But I said to her, look, we've got this guy. He is so sensational. I can't tell you. I said, he's just gorgeous to look at. He just has got the most incredible voice. If we put him on the next Radio Luxembourg, whatever it was called, next week or the week after, I mean, would you come and see him with a view to giving him a slot on Ready, Steady, Go? And she said, absolutely. Now, I cannot remember to this day whether she actually came at this point. And I was getting all the blurb ready. I thought, oh, this is such a cool guy to write about, you know, the cat slunk in and, you know, all that kind of thing. We were getting so excited about this, Peter. Anyway, come New Year's Eve, I'd only been there since September. We were all called in on New Year's Eve to Arthur Muxler's office, and we were made redundant. Just there and then. We didn't come back after. So Peter and I were just devastated. So I said, well, what are we going to do? Because he was quite happy for us to manage him, Cat Stevens. So Peter said, I'm going to see if we can record him at Lansdowne. I'm going to call Monty Babson, who owned Lansdowne. Monty was a very well-known musician. He had the Monty Babson band, I guess. He was a jazz musician and he played the clarinet, but he owned Lansdowne Studios. And so this is what was happening. And then all of a sudden, the whole thing was taken out of our hands because Barry Cross came on the scene. I don't know what space of time. It was very quickly because we really didn't get very far. I think he might not have come on the scene that quickly, Barry. He ended up by managing. He was a seriously big time manager. I mean, he made him. Barry Cross made him. But we didn't have the wherewithal in a way. We just had the ambition. We had no money to back this up with or anything like that. So it was just taken out of our hands. It was really sad. But interestingly enough, when I was in Marrakesh, when I was living in Marrakesh, and one day I see round the pool Cat Stevens walking in with Patti d'Arbanville, my Lady d'Arbanville. And he saw me and he brought her over to me and he said, this is the lady that discovered me, which was really sweet. Now, funnily enough, Lansdowne Studios was where I made my great singing debut, actually. Yes. I was there to interview Manfred Mann. They used to record there. Not always, because I think they were EMI artists. Couldn't swear to it, but they were recording this album at Lansdowne Studios. And I was quite friendly with Paul Jones because he and Sheila, that was his wife, lived in Kilburn, somewhere behind the Kilburn Road. I don't know if he didn't drive or he just didn't have a car. And they had two very young little boys. I remember them. One was called Jacob. I've got a feeling the other was called Matthew. They were tiny. Anyway, he didn't have any means of transport whenever I saw him anywhere. And so if I was going home and he was going home, I'd drop him off somewhere around the back of the Quex Road and Kilburn Road. Anyway, so this particular day, I'm in the studio with them and they're putting down some tracks for this album. And their backing singer didn't turn up, right? So they're waiting, nothing's happening. So John Burgess, lovely John Burgess, who was their record producer, said, oh, Sue, you can do it. I wouldn't leave. Oh, no. I said, I couldn't sing my way out of a paper bag. No way. I said, I've got a dreadful singer. Yes, it won't be a problem. You know, we'll make sure that it's okay. And I was so embarrassed to be doing this. But I think the song was probably called Watch Your Step. It will be on whatever album this was, because that's that was my line. behind whatever they were singing, I had to go, watch your step, watch your... John would cue me, right? It was hysterical. Then I let all inhibitions go, you know. But
Oh,
yes, I guess the track made it to the album. I can kind of remember that song, actually. I think it was quite a good song. It was quite a soul type song, but I have no idea what album it was on. So that was it. That was the beginning of the end of my singing career. So that was EMI, my experience, my 4-month experience at EMI. I don't know how long I would have lasted at the Beatles Monthly and the Rolling Stones Monthly. They would have been starting all that, you know, 66 was that pivotal year for them when it all started going wrong, and John was saying they were bigger than Christ and all that. And then Bess, I think, was on that tour, and the Philippines, that whole thing with snubbing him out. I think that was 66 was the pivotal year for them. I think when they decided, that's it, we're not going on tour. They're all screaming, nobody can hear us. So my days probably were numbered anyway, but I had no idea of the time. I just thought, I'm getting out of here, Mr. Omani. I don't want to work for you anymore. And I think I'd done my best with them. You know, I don't know how much further I could have taken it. So that was that. And so I didn't have a job in journalism anymore. That was my last job in journalism. So in actual point of fact, I only ever worked for Boyfriend magazine, NME, and the Beatles Monthly and the Rolling Stones Monthly. And it's interesting because of all those publications, all the way through, I was linked to the Stones one way or the other, not the Beatles, because I ghosted for the Stones on Boyfriend. Then I wrote several articles for NME on them, and then the Beatles Monthly and the Rolling Stones Monthly. So whatever I did as a music journalist always involved the Rolling Stones. Yeah. And so between then and going to Marrakesh in 1970, I worked for Bunny Lewis, who was a very well-known agent. I was there for 3 years. It was a good job. So I'd never been an agent before, so Bunny taught me everything I knew, and I didn't realize until I started getting into this that I was born to do the deal. I loved closing a deal. I was a closer. I got off on that, actually. And Bunny, it was a step away from everything else. So Bunny had this incredible roster. I mean, he did handle some singing artists as well. He had Craig Douglas and all these people, you wouldn't know them from that era. Well, Craig Douglas, you might. He had David Whitfield and French Lean Renault and all these different people. But he had the biggest roster of DJs and TV presenters, and he had all the DJs that had come from Radio Caroline, nearly all of them. He did have nearly all of them, and then went on to Radio 1. I mean, from Bunny was there, and I used to look after them for PAs and TV commercials. Well, they wanted these people, these DJs were so big, they were mega, and they had them for the soap powder commercials and the God knows what tea commercial, coffee, you name it, they had it. And Simon D, who was he was very big because he had his talk show on BBC originally, and then it went over to ITV. He had everybody. He had Pete Brady, he had Annie Nightingale, he had Stuart Henry, he had Katie Boyle, he had David Jacobs, who was he was the front man for, what was it called? With the disc, when you did the Jukebox Jury, which the Beatles were on, actually. That was one of their first. David was the front man for that. And it was a very nice job. It was a really nice job, actually. I like that. I could handle these people. So except Simon, when he just got too big for his boots, and he was going through his, I only want to do things that I believe in. And so he asked me to give back £10,000 for the new Daz commercial or something. I said, are you being serious? He said, no, I'm not doing it. I don't believe in this project. I said, well, you'll believe in it for £10,000, you know. Anyway, so I was there. It was a nice job. And when I left to go to Marrakesh, it was so sweet. Separately, Annie Nightingale and Stuart Henry, who both had Radio 1 shows, and then Stuart went to Luxembourg. They both did a farewell thing on air to me, wishing me good luck, which was really sweet. And then it was off to Marrakesh.
In the next episode of She's with the Band, Sue details her terrifying and daring experiences in Marrakesh and almost being kidnapped in a world full of opulence and romance.
She's with the band.